Hello and welcome to the Empower Couples podcast, where here you get modern, non-boring relationship advice for you and your partner to communicate like pros, fight smarter, and stay on the same team no matter the challenge that you face. I am one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman.
And I'm Jocelyn Freeman, but you all just know us as the Freemans.
And this episode is titled How to Disagree Without Fighting.
So we had used this phrase in one of our posts last week, and it went crazy viral. And there were so many shares of people saying, wow, I or we need to get better at this. This is so important to marriage. And many people messaging us and saying, can you do an entire episode on this? So we listened to you guys, and that's why we are covering this. We have to remember that if you're going to be with someone a long time, which we hope that's your goal, right? When you get married or when you commit to someone in a partnership, you're hoping it's your entire life. And
I'll add, it's duration with high levels of satisfaction.
Yes, it's not just about being together a long time, but being fulfilled as well. Now, life is going to present these situations, these decision points, these challenges where you might not always see eye to eye, even if you're similar people, right? Even if you assume, well, we have these things in common. And I thought that when we were seeing each other early in our marriage, we believed the same things about this. Well, you change, you evolve, and you're going to encounter things, some of which you didn't even anticipate. And so we have to be prepared to disagree from time to time, to remember that that isn't a threat, like that just because your partner sees something differently does not mean we should go to battle and it become this big heated thing. It needs to be a conversation, which we're going to outline for you guys how to make it a conversation that's collaborative and that incorporates what's important to both of you, because you are two different people. You have different perceptions, you have different preferences, you have different backgrounds, your upbringing and how that has shaped what you believe in, what's important to you. You also have different fears, you have insecurities, and you have different motivation drivers as well.
So what we need to really have as the background here is I think most couples see disagreement and fighting or conflict as really the same thing. And I know in a sense I did early on, and a lot of the work that we do with couples is really making this distinction, because as you're saying, as much as you have in common and similar, which, a lot of data and science now shows that it really is what we have in similar that brings us together. It's not actually that true that opposites attract. It's just not the case. But with all that being said, you are going to have these differences in how you see things. And so you have to accept that a part of marriage is going to have those things where you're going to disagree, but that does not mean that you have to fight. And so I think that's just really one of the key things to take away here, because now what happens is it's really about going down a decision-making process. When you face obstacles, when you do see things differently, you can have disagreements, but you can do it without turning against each other. You can do it without escalating it into a conflict. You can do it without the labels or bringing up the past or starting to hurt or insult your partner.
Or catastrophize things.
Yeah, catastrophize. And the whole point is you can have things happen in your life. You can even see those things differently. And at the same time, you can approach it in a way that gets you to a collaborative next step. And we're going to go a lot more into this, but you need to be able to evaluate your different ideas and then make a collaborative decision that's best for the family and for the future. And sometimes the best decision is a blend of both of your ideas. Now, sometimes the path might look like it really is more like the one idea of your partner. But can you do either one of these, again, without fighting against each other and keeping it like, okay, we had a disagreement, and that's just the next step in us being able to collaboratively evaluate the various options and path and then make the right one for our future.
So I know many of you are hearing that and saying, yes, exactly, Freemans. We want to be able to do that. How? We are very soon going to outline those practical how-tos. But because we meet with couples every day, we get an insider look at some of the very real adulting decisions that we have to make, right? We use that term adulting for just the responsibilities, the decision points. Sometimes it's heavy. Sometimes there's a lot. Sometimes you do make a decision where there are different sacrifices that come, right? And so just some examples that you could probably relate to at least one of them. Should we put our baby in a daycare, get a nanny, or one of us stays home full time, right? That's a big decision. Do we take this better paying job, but then know it'll be longer hours away from home and the family? Do we live closer to our in-laws or some of our family, or live in an area that we both enjoy? Do we have to cut off for the amount of dinners that we eat out versus we make at home? For our child, do we go the naturopathic route or use prescriptions when they experience some symptoms? Do we save more money in this season, invest into possible gains, or spend more on having life experiences? And I know some of those are like big decision points that you're not going to encounter on a weekly basis necessarily, but there are even smaller things like, was what my partner felt was a big deal and they're upset about, is that a big deal to me? And then you can focus on how you disagree about that. No, that situation, that wasn't a big deal. I don't know why you're making it a big deal. And the other person's like, it is a big deal because of this. And so there are these bigger moments, and then there's these smaller moments where you could, like Aaron said, turn against each other and have disagreement become a fight. But with these decision points, you get emotional because we are emotional human beings. And now I know some of you are even thinking, no, I'm the logical one, right? I think logically, I always evaluate based on data and all those things. Even people who say that are still driven by emotions. It might seem more subtle in the sense that
the logic gives you the feeling of security or confidence. So it really still is driven by some emotion. Like, I feel good because I evaluated all the possible logical solutions, and that gives me a feeling of confidence. And so, it really is all emotion driven. There's a lot of data and science and studies behind that too. And yet we get that there's different levels of emotion that drive different individuals. And like you're saying, that is a part of the difference on why decision points or not seeing things the same way, different perspectives, different hurts, like it's all coming from an emotion, but they might be coming from a different type of emotion, which is likely because one is more familiar to you for various things, which I know is where you're going next.
Well, consider this, because you explained that perfectly well. Consider this. This is going to be counterintuitive to you guys. You might think that when you're in this moment of a disagreement and you're, fighting for what you believe and how it should go and what the decision should be, and you could think that, well, I'm just doing or proposing what I think is best for us. But what we're often proposing or what we revert to is what's familiar. So get that, like that sometimes when you reach these decision points, you might say, no, this is what's best for our future. And maybe it's the case sometimes, but the majority of the time, if you really look at the root of where that's coming from, it's because it's familiar.
This is the path that I'm used to.
And this is, again, we're inviting you to just look outside of your normal way of thinking, that what is familiar may not always be aligned with the future that you want. And in fact, what you're wanting to build towards together and the kind of life you want to create together might require growth, which growth is many times outside your comfort zone. So that's just something we encourage you as we go into these how-tos, is to really even think, wow, am I sometimes so fixed and attached to certain ways I think it should go because it's familiar, rather than could there even be a better, more expansive, more aligned decision that feels a little uncomfortable? It's out of the comfort zone, it's out of what's familiar, and it requires me and us to grow.
And one other thing, if you find, I could have actually said if you find that your partner is inflexible, but if you're listening to this, I think it's better if you look for yourself. If you have found that there are certain subjects, topics, points of conversation inflection decision points that you take an inflexible stance on, like, no, it's got to be this way. It's my idea. I know this is best. Many times that inflexible stance can come from an unrelated unmet need. Mm-hmm. And it isn't as much about the subject or the decision that you're talking about right now. So just a more of an easy general example. If you have an underlying feeling of being controlled or not considered, mm-hmm. and that is this sort of undertone that isn't showing up right in this moment, but you do feel or have felt that your partner gets to make most of the decisions and they're not considering you as often, so you feel this control, then without knowing, you'll take such a firm stance on this one thing, like let's say where to eat out for food. You don't make the stance because this is actually important. You're making the stance because you're actually tired of not feeling considered, and you're fighting against the feeling of being controlled once again.
Yeah.
So there are, I don't know if I have a percent. There's certainly an amount of time in which you have to consider how important and valuable is my decision in this subject or just the next decision. Mm-hmm. And, well, it's really not. So why am I fighting with my partner for this? It's, well, what's the underlying need? That seems to be showing up as unmet once again. Mm-hmm. And that's really the thing that you should be addressing.
And I know many of you were like, ding, 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 Aaron, like that's hitting it right on the head. And we are so grateful that there's so many new listeners. We're having thousands of new listeners every episode, and we get a lot of messages after the episode saying, well, how do we book one of those sessions with you guys? So as we go into these how-tos and you wanting more guidance, more accountability, even us, like a lot of what we do in coaching is interrupt the patterns that couples get into and say, hey, here's what we see needs to be shifted. Now, unfortunately, we have a very long wait list for sessions. We're truly so grateful for how many couples want to work with us. So go to meetthefreemans.com/links because you're going to see all of the other ways to get more support from us, more resources, including you could meet us in person at our next in-person couples workshop in Arizona. We have actually over half of couples travel in from out of town to attend that. So make it a little fun weekend getaway. But then if that's not possible because you're in another country or for whatever reason, make sure you look at our other online resources because that's why we create them and we make them extremely affordable so that you're able to get these tools and resources. So again, that's meetthefreemans.com/links and you'll see our most popular resources there.
And the couples workshop is on October 6th, 2024. And here we are in August. So make your
time.
Preparations. Yes, there is time. So let's dive into the how-tos around this, right? What are some of the steps? What are the actions you can take so that you can keep a disagreement, a way of seeing things differently without it turning into a fight, and then stay on the same page and be able to make the appropriate decision forward?
So this one may seem obvious, yet so many forget to actually implement it, and that's to be thoughtful about the timing. That when you bring up potentially heated topics, you want to consider your energy levels not being too overstimulated because sometimes that's the case. Like I know for us, and we have a toddler and the majority of couples we work with have children. Sometimes you can take out the stress or feeling overstimulated by the noise, all the questions being asked, how busy your day was. And so in a sense, you're more in like a reactive survival brain, and that can play a part of not feeling collaborative. But here's the thing, you can't always use time as an excuse. We're all busy. We all have a lot going on, and we can all fill our time with something. You have to remember, though, what your priorities are and get creative to still have the time, make the time for each other. Again, that might even require some creativity, but just being thoughtful about when, the energy that you're both in so that you can be clear-headed. Okay, next step.
I think it's not going to be like a logical step the way I see it. It's more like you could use any one of these. You could use any combination. So I'll say number 2 is to, before you have the conversation, to set the intention for the conversation. Now, the intention can be a certain way you want the conversation to feel or a way of being. Like, hey, I know we've talked about moving, or I know we've talked about this job, or we've talked about either doing, more holistic wellness for our child versus
pharmaceutical.
Biomedical approach. You could say, I know we've talked about that, and it's been challenging at times, but I really want to have the intention where we can really understand each other's point of view, right? So you could set an intention, you could say, or I really want to set the intention for us to feel, really open and free and collaborative, right? So intention is more, to me, how do we want this to feel?
Yes.
Now, additionally with that, take you back a little bit. I've mentioned this a few times on other podcasts. The Greeks used to have debates, and they used to do it sort of as fun. It's like you could bring forth an idea, you could test your oration skills, your articulation, you could bring forth and just practice how to debate. And it was really always a positive thing, because what they started with was, hey, let's declare what our positive outcome is that would be a win for each of us from this debate. And that might sound like back in the day was, hey, let's bring forth two ideas, we'll debate them, and let's see if we can find an idea that neither of us had thought of, something like that, right? So by setting the outcome, even for a debate, you can keep it focused on the ideas without making it personal. So that's just one of those two ways. Hey, let's have this conversation. I know we have disagreement. Here's our intent for how we want to feel. Or set, hey, here's the outcome that I think would really benefit us. So start with the outcome, and then now that paints the picture or guides how this conversation is going to go.
And just to clarify, outcome, he doesn't mean like the decision made, but more so, hey, the outcome that we're working towards is to make the best decision for our family about blank, to feel really collaborative about the decision that we make.
And it could be saying, well, I know we're not going to get to the final decision, but an outcome from this is I'd like to take away what the next action is that we're going to take.
And that we both feel heard, right? And that goes to the next step, right? We're talking about how to disagree without fighting, is to take turns hearing each other out on your initial perspective/solution and understanding why it's important to them. And I know you're saying, okay, wait, just take time to hear each other out. Like, we should all know that. But do you do it? Do you actually give each other a chance? Because in our sessions, when we're seeing couples work through different exercises, they will very quickly interrupt each other. And therefore, again, we don't use a whistle, but we could as coaches and be like, "Rrr." But we say, hey, whoa, notice how you're not even listening to each other. You're not hearing each other out. You're actually making assumptions. You're jumping to conclusions. And that's even when it will become a fight, because we're not feeling heard. We're not even feeling respected. You're interrupting me. You're not even giving me a chance to express my feeling. You're not even curious about why it's important to me. So now it does feel like we're against each other. So this is even one of the most important things to feel like a team, is to give each other a chance to express. And again, I want to make sure it's very clear the underlying why. Because it's very easy to disagree on the logical details, but this will be relevant for the next steps that we go into. You've got to understand why that's important to them. Why is that the solution that they're proposing? Because that's what's important that you understand about each other and that you incorporate in the ultimate decision. So for example, the underlying why being about security, being about peace of mind, being about feeling like you're doing what's best for your kids. And maybe that's linked to a childhood experience that you had that you're wanting to rewrite, for example. So the underlying why is very important.
Let me do a quick transition, because with that, once you understand the why, you're more connected to more of the emotional driver for your partner, whether it be security, collaboration, safety, success, community, support. And with that, now you can operate under the assumption that there isn't just one path of action to meet the emotional need of what I just listed. So that what that also means is you can have the assumption that, you know what, we both brought one idea forward and maybe neither of them are whole and complete by themselves. So what you now get to do is to try to seek for a combined win-win solution that includes both primarily the underlying need or why, but also ideas and maybe preferences. And just a really simple, I want to keep this one simple. You can just write out 10 possible solutions. And the goal is just to get the 10. Like that's the main thing. And what you'll notice as you go through is the first 2 will be the initial ones you both brought forward. But now you have to get 8 more. And you don't even have to have all of these be things you would actually do. But as you try to get creative, as you just try to come up with 8 more, you're going to add pieces of each other's. That's going to lead you to a place of thinking more outside the box or creative. You'll add some humorous ones in there. You don't actually plan on doing them, but you'll laugh. And then by the time you get like 6, 7, or 8, you have enough other pieces that you hadn't thought of that one of those decisions is like, wow, neither of us thought about that. It likely incorporates both. We both feel that we understand the why of each other. And wow, that's like a pretty legit possibility.
Yeah.
So just going down that path of just getting to 10 and then sitting back and seeing what that kind of process brought forward is a powerful way to stay on the same team, even when you initially had disagreed.
And taking that one into the next step, when you're in that state of creativity and creating possibilities, you then can be more curious about each other. And so this is the next step, is ask clarifying questions instead of making assumptions or jumping to conclusions. Because we'll talk to couples, and whether we're witnessing their area of disagreement on the call or they're referring to a recent issue, argument, conflict, what they'll say a lot of times is, wow, we got 45 minutes into this argument. It got so much more heated. We are saying hurtful things. We are feeling like enemies. But where it took a turn was a big assumption that one or both of them made. And then they'll be like, wait, you meant blank, blank, blank instead of this other thing I thought? And they're like, yeah. Oh, I guess if I had clarified that, we could have skipped about 30 minutes of this. And so in that state of creativity and asking clarifying questions, you'll likely, again, just reach even better solutions together because you're understanding each other more, you're feeling heard, which is one of the main points that you need to get to. And that actually even brings us to this, we really love this former FBI negotiator. Oh gosh, Chris Voss, thank you. I knew it was Voss, but first name. So he's amazing. Highly recommend his book. And he's just fascinating because he used to be in hostage negotiations, bank robberies, all these like crazy situations. And you'd think, well, how's that relevant to marriage? But he talks about these principles of negotiation and really how this plays into relationships. And let's say he was even talking to someone who had a hostage. What he learned about human beings was that if you want influence, which influence is a part of marriage too, right? Not manipulation. That's something else. We're not talking about manipulation. We're talking about a positive influence. In order to do that, the other person has to feel understood and some degree of empathy. And I know that that can be a far stretch when you really disagree, but he talks about that. And it is so important, and we talk about that in the marriage dynamic, that what makes you feel like enemies is misunderstood, not empathized with, totally disregarded as to why it's important to me. So getting to that place of understanding and empathy is like the main thing to be able to keep these conversations instead of conflicts.
Mm-hmm. And then the last piece is really what takes you forward and also helps you in future, well, now we'll call them negotiations since you just talked about that. But the last one here is to really keep your agreements. Now, you're going to have agreements for times of disagreement. I changed that. We normally talk about agreements for times of conflict, but we're trying to keep a disagreement from turning into a conflict. Mm-hmm. So your agreements for times of disagreement. We're not going to yell. We're not going to swear. We're not going to bring up the past. Even if there's emotion, we're not just going to walk out of the room. Whatever they are, you have to be clear about these agreements and then honor them in the moments where you have this initial disagreement. Now, also, you're going to, from all of these steps, you're going to have each other feel understood, understand the why. You're going to create empathy and understanding. You're going to have done the 10 creative solutions. You've got a better idea than both of you initially had. And now it's about action. So what roles are each of you going to play to move this forward? So now you're creating a new agreement or a promise. You both must now keep to the agreement or promise you made about what your role, your responsibility is going to be in moving this forward.
It's a great point. And I love that last point. I do just want to say a couple more things about those agreements for disagreement, right? We typically call it agreements for times of conflict. And that's actually something in our de-escalating conflicts guide. So when I refer to our main link, meetthefreemans.com/links, that's one of the guides that you're going to see there, where you create your agreements for times of conflict or just when emotion is even starting to arise, because you have to know how to de-escalate things, because you're going to be in this conversation and you both might start feel emotion arise because it's important to you and maybe you're not doing the best at hearing each other. So you have to learn how to de-escalate things and stay on track, because one of the most frustrating dynamics in a marriage can be that you get into this moment where you see things differently and you can't even complete the conversation because you have to be like, you know what, we can't even talk about this anymore. I'm too upset. And then you try again in a week, same thing. And that lack of feeling like you can get to resolution is so frustrating and draining. So make sure you're utilizing our guides in order to learn how to de-escalate things, because we get very practical into the strategies to do that. But you've got to honor these even when you start to feel emotion. One of the main things that we need in a marriage is the ability to regulate our emotions, because it does matter to you. We know that these decisions that you're making, sure, sometimes they're small, like, do we go to this place for dinner or that place, right? But some of these are high stakes decisions, it feels like, right? It's about you, it's about your family, it's about your kids, it's about your finances. Those feel important. They actually can have a big impact. So we know why you feel the emotion, but we just don't want the emotion to then drive the conversation in a negative direction. So we need to know how to regulate our emotions and be able to keep the conversation productive. And a good way to do that is having those very clear agreements and honoring them and learning how to regulate your emotions, which again, we teach all of that in the guide.
Mm-hmm. So that brings us to the end. I know there was a lot here.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think take away the context for disagreement versus conflict, staying on the same page and collaborative. And then with the how-tos, let me do a quick summary, even though they weren't exactly like bullet points. First, be thoughtful about the timing. Then set your intention and or be clear about the desired positive outcome. Take turns hearing each other out so you can understand why that's important to each of you. See if there's a combined win-win solution by just writing out 10 ideas and then see what comes from that. Ask clarifying questions to get rid of the assumptions and that there's no not jumping to conclusions. And then lastly, honor your agreements for times of disagreement and then the promises to the actions that you're each making.
So we really hope that this was valuable, because again, remember, we're going to reach these important decision points, and that's a part of life. We need to be able to do that as a team and to actually leave conversations feeling more connected, more aligned, even if there was a little bit of tension. Tension doesn't always mean conflict. It means you're having an important conversation. And so being able to navigate that and continue to be a loving, connected team that has each other's back and just wants the best for your life and for your family. So let us know if this episode was helpful. We love getting messages. And actually, the best way you can let us know is by writing a review on the platform that you're listening. We can't tell you how much those really help us. So if you go to whatever platform you're listening on, look where they have you give like stars, and a lot of them let you write a sentence or two. That helps us so much. And if you're new here, make sure you hit the subscribe button so that you can hear past and future episodes, because we've covered so many topics that you want to make sure that you're hearing. And again, all of our resources are linked at meetthefreemans.com/links. Come meet us in person at the workshop or use our online resources. We've got your backs and we're rooting for you, and we will talk to you on the next episode.